Sure, thanks a lot. I don't have a mic.
Supposed to give him a microphone? They didn't give me.
All right, great. Thanks a lot.
Is it on?
All right, great. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. I wanted to ask some questions about the UN and free press, but just in your discussion, something jumped. This idea of hate speech. Maybe people know or don't, but this is like the government of Cameroon cited hate speech as a basis to shut off the internet to millions of people for 94 days. Didn't seem that the UN said much about that, at least that in reporting on it. My question was whether you think there's a trend in the UN system of some of the abuses that you're discussing actually being implemented by UN agencies themselves. WIPO, for example, has used criminal defamation against a radio station in Switzerland. The FAO is trying to shut down a publication that's called Italian Insider that reported on corruption. And in the UN itself, there are no rules for due process for journalists. There's no content-neutral accreditation. So I'm wondering, especially the groups that actually interact with the UN, if you think that there are things the UN could do better, and if you're in a position to actually make that happen, then just I have one. It's very rare for this issue, at least to my mind, of document removal to come up. So it turns out on the panel, there's somebody that I know has actually made a request to get a document removed from Google search using the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And I just wanted to know, since we're here, how is that a form of censorship, or is it entirely legitimate? Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone want to take the first questions on what is the UN actually a rights enabling space in this regard?
Well, you're the okay, sure. I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. So we've seen a lot more recognition at the UN recently about the safety of journalists, about very quick resolution against internet shutdowns, et cetera. So in that normative space, the attempt rhetorically to create norms, and I don't want to say it is a norm, right? This is a step to create a norm. We've seen some progress. There are enormous implementation gaps. So there's a lot more that can be done. I actually used to work at UNESCO, and I found it very, very frustrating trying to write a report there that couldn't mention any country names. How can you possibly discuss a world trends and freedom of expression report without actually naming countries or regions where, these issues are happening? So there are definite gaps, and I know that it's very interesting what you're talking about. I don't know if you were in the AMA on Reddit that we did asking this question. I think it's something I'd be interested in learning more about, if there is this UN issue. But also, what was the second question you were asking about the DMCA? So I will just note that in Ecuador, for example, the president there has been using that as a form of censorship and using this U.S. law to demand what amounts to automatic takedown of content, and so that certainly constitutes censorship, and we're disturbed about that. If you want to add.
On the issue of UNESCO that you mentioned, we noted that they're having their World Press Freedom Day event in Indonesia, and there are concerns about the situation there. We certainly hope that they can use the presence of Ms. Bokova there and others to talk to them, use it as a model to really put pressure on the government to improve. But they say the right things. The Secretary General says good things. We need that. We need them to keep saying it. We saw that there was quite a lot of interest in his World Press Freedom Day speech on social media. Hopefully that will resonate at a time when we do need to hear the words. And it would be good if UNESCO also set an example.
On World Press Freedom Day, I call for an end to all crackdowns against journalists, because a free press advances peace and justice for all. When we protect journalists, their words and pictures can change our world.
It. This used to say Inner City Press. Somebody, I don't know at what point. Oh, we're going to go through the very same gate they threw me out of on February 19th. The issue I have is that the top of the organization is corrupt, and they throw out journalists who write about it. That's my issue. I don't have an issue. They have an issue. The issue is called censorship.